Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 118th session of the online Optum Learning Series. And today we have with us Dr. Pratik Gogri. He is an ophthalmologist who received his medical degree from the Parvara Institute of Medical Sciences in India. After completing his medical education, he then pursued his ophthalmological training at the same institute. He then went ahead to do his cornea fellowship at LVPEI Hyderabad. He is a clinical scientist who has several publications to his credit in peer-reviewed journals. He has made various national as well as international presentations, which include paper presentations, and is actively involved in teaching and training. Dr. Gogri is a young dynamic physician who specializes in the medical and surgical management of various corneal disorders. His expertise includes management of keratoconus and various corneal scars. His main areas of interest are LASIK and refractive laser surgery, keratoconus, corneal scar management, and also specialty contact lens fitting. He treats all his patients with utmost diligence and dignity, and his main goal is to provide best possible care to each patient. And today, Dr. Pratik is going to talk to us about an overview about the refractive surgeries, laser keratorefractive surgeries, and he'll guide us through what are the lasers available and just an overview about that particular aspect, which I think it's really important as optometrists. Because we might get in a patient who walks into our clinic and, as primary eye care practitioners, we might have to, deal with them, explain to them. Of course, the procedure is done by the ophthalmologist, but we do play an important role in explaining. So welcome, Dr. Gogri, onto our platform. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And let me just leave the screen time to you now.
So thank you very much, Fakhruddin, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you for the very kind introduction too. So hello everyone, and a warm welcome to today's webinar on laser keratorefractive surgery. Thank you for taking your time out and being here with me on a Sunday evening. So right at the outset, I would like to mention that I have no financial interest in any of the material or the devices being presented in today's presentation. So keratorefractive surgeries. So now getting rid of the glasses was thought by ophthalmologists long back, even by scientists. So J. Ball was a scientist who first thought of getting his patients rid of the glasses. And what he did was he used to use an eye cup with a spring mounted mallet that flattens the cornea, basically changes the shape of the cornea by flattening it. And what he used to do is that he used to strike the central part of the cornea from over the lid with a metal ball which was mounted on a spring and which used to strike with the help of a striker. What he actually advertised is that it restores your eyesight and renders spectacle useless. And this is the real photograph of the advertisement which he published long back in the early 1800s. And this is how the journey of refractive surgery started. So in 1974, a refractive procedure called radial keratotomy was developed in the USSR by Zlatoslav Fodorov and later introduced to the United States. RK, as it is called in the short form, involves making a number of cuts in the cornea to change its shape and correct the refractive errors. The incisions are made with a diamond knife, and following the introduction of RK, doctors routinely corrected nearsightedness, myopia, hyperopia, as well as astigmatism by giving various incisions on the cornea. But the problem with radial keratotomy was that it was very much unpredictable and the outcomes were not very good. Then came the era of laser technology. While excimer lasers were initially used for industrial purposes, in 1980, an Indian scientist by the name Rangaswamy Srinivasan, who worked at IBM, was using an excimer laser to make microscopic cuts in microchips for informatic equipment. He discovered that he could use the same excimer to cut organic tissues, that is body tissues, with very high accuracy and without causing any heat damage to the tissue. The discovery of an effective biological cutting laser along with the development of computers to control it, enabled the development of the new era of laser refractive surgery technique in the year 1980s. In 1983, Stephen Trockel, a scientist at Columbia University, in collaboration with Theo Seeler, who was an ophthalmologist, and Srinivasan, the same Indian scientist, performed the first laser refractive surgery by the name photorefractive keratectomy and in Germany, and helped to get rid of the patients, especially the myopic patients, to get them rid of glasses. So keratorefractive surgery in today's world, laser keratorefractive surgery encompasses three procedures: PRK, LASIK, SMILE. So I'll give you a brief overview of all these three procedures one by one. So before we go to the procedure in detail, the primary importance of any cosmetic surgery is patient selection. So the consultation process for laser refractive surgery procedure is a complex task where the surgeon needs to determine the patient expectations and evaluate the current state of the patient, whether he is a hypermetrope or a myope, or he has compound myopic astigmatism, and what is the quantum of the astigmatism. Along with that, the surgeon needs to make an honest evaluation of whether the patient is suitable for laser refractive surgery or no. The history tells you where the patient wants to go, and the examination gives you a starting point of the patient journey into laser refractive surgery. One more important job is to fill in the gaps with a treatment plan so that the patient can go from where they are to where they would like to be in their aims and expectations. Any cosmetic surgery, the patient needs to be made aware that there have to be a gap between their final outcome and the expected outcome, because some patients concentrate only on the improvements achieved, while some others concentrate only on the gap between the expectations and the results. And these are the patients which may get a bit difficult to manage later on. So managing the gap is an important part of the preoperative counseling that we have to do in our day-to-day practice. Clearly, it is better to address these concerns prior to doing any surgical intervention for any patient. So that is why patient selection and counseling is very important for any cosmetic surgery in the world, which includes the most commonly performed cosmetic surgery, that is the laser refractive surgery. So now, the criteria which we follow for a patient to be eligible for a laser refractive surgery, first is the age criteria. Generally, we don't do laser refractive surgery for patients less than 18 years of age. Preferably, the patient should be around 20 years of age or more. Refractive error, I'll come to it later. What is the quantum of refractive error which can be corrected with laser refractive surgery? One more criteria which needs to be fulfilled is that the patient should be having stable refractive error for last 1 year. This is also a very important criteria along with the age criteria. The third criteria is that the patient should be having some minimum amount of corneal thickness. The exact quantum of the same I'll be telling you in the subsequent slide for the various surgeries. Apart from these three factors, one more factor which in the recent time has actually made the predictability of corneal refractive surgery and the patient selection much better is the corneal topography. So what exactly is corneal topography? Corneal topography is classically defined as a non-invasive exploratory technique to analyze both qualitatively and quantitatively the morphology of the cornea, enabling its geometric characterization and differentiating various patterns which can be normal or abnormal. It helps to map the corneal surface in various ways. Hence, it is a very important diagnostic tool that can predict within a narrow margin of error whether the patient is suitable for laser refractive surgery or no, and if at all he is suitable, whether there is any risk in the future for the patient of developing one of the most dreaded complications of laser refractive surgery, which I'll be coming to later in my presentation. So corneal topography, along with the age factor, the quantum of refractive error, stable refractive error for 1 year, and the minimal corneal thickness, these are the 5 main factors which helps us in making a decision whether the patient is suitable for laser refractive surgery or no. If a patient is suitable for laser refractive surgery, so then there are 3 types of basic laser refractive surgery, as I've already mentioned. First one is the photorefractive keratectomy, or the short form, it goes by the short form PRK. So what basically we do in PRK? So in PRK, what we do is that, so first we remove the top layer of the cornea, that is epithelium, in the central 8 mm zone. For the removal of the epithelium, there are various ways which I'll be discussing later. So once we have removed the epithelium from the central zone, we can, this is a short animation which is showing the same, the removal of the epithelium from the central 8 mm of the cornea. Once the epithelium is removed, then we apply excimer laser to change the shape of the cornea depending on the amount of refractive error which we have to correct. For hypermetropia, we change the peripheral shape of the cornea, and for myopia, we cause central flattening of the cornea. Once that is done, we put a bandage contact lens so that the patient is comfortable after the surgery till the epithelium heals back into its position. This is an animation of how we do PRK. So just to put things more into perspective, so there are three ways of removing the epithelium. The most oldest way was using 20% alcohol to loosen the epithelium, and then we used to remove the epithelium, which is generally avoided these days because of the toxicity related to the alcohol usage. A moist brush is a mechanical way of removing the epithelium with the help of a brush. It's like a toothbrush which has a rotatory movement, and it helps us to remove or scrape off the epithelium, which is again not very commonly used these days. The two most common techniques used these days are, first is using Paracane. So what Paracane does is that it loosens the bond which is there between the epithelial cells. And once we scrape off the epithelium, it is very easy to remove the epithelium with the help of an instrument called as a hockey knife. The latest way to remove the epithelium is with the help of a laser. So what we do is that basically the epithelium, the depth till which the epithelium has to be removed, preferably 55 microns is what we feed into the machine, and the laser itself removes the epithelium. So there is no use of any instrument, any brush, any alcohol or any eye drop to remove the epithelium, and it is totally without any instrumentation. So these are the four ways in which you remove the epithelium in PRK. Once that is done, the rest of the procedure remains the same. Let me just show you a short live surgical video in which how we do a PRK. So basically, this is an alcohol well which used to be used in the initial days. These days, because we don't use alcohol, we use Paracane in this well. To the Paracane, the epithelium is exposed to the Paracane for around 20 seconds. So there is a time which is needed for the epithelial cells to get loosened. Once that is done, then we use a hockey. Then we dry the surface. Once the surface is dry, we use an instrument called as a hockey knife. This is the instrument which is a hockey knife, and scrape off the epithelium in the central 8 mm zone, which has been already been marked with the alcohol well, which was used initially. So this is the way we scrape off the epithelium. The stromal fibers generally are not damaged with this because they are quite tough that way, and they don't get damaged with scraping off the epithelium. So once the epithelium is scraped off, then comes the next step of applying the excimer laser. So what we do is that this is the process in which the excimer laser is being applied to flatten the central part of the cornea based on the refractive error which has been already been fed in the machine. So this main laser part takes somewhere in between 10 to 30 seconds, depending on the amount of refractive error which we have to correct. Once that is done, then we apply a small drop of mitomycin so that the patient doesn't, so that the few of the post-operative complications of PRK can be avoided. Once we wash off the mitomycin, then we apply a bandage contact lens at the end of the procedure. The bandage contact lens helps the patient to be a little bit comfortable in the post-operative period when the epithelium is growing over the cornea. Once that is done, then we remove the speculum and we start eye drops for the patient. So now, what is the quantum of refractive error which can be corrected with PRK? So PRK can correct myopia of up to -12 diopters, hypermetropia of up to 6 diopters, and astigmatism of up to 6 diopters. There are some special considerations in which PRK have to be used. They are used in patients who may be reluctant to undergo procedures that require flap formation like in LASIK. In those patients, PRK can be given a choice. PRK is also preferable in patients like who want to join defense, be it army or pilots or professional athletes or any other individuals in whom there is a risk of developing flap related complications in LASIK later on in life. Also, PRK is used in patients in which LASIK is contraindicated, as patients who have a relatively thin cornea, or in patients who have an epithelial anterior basement membrane dystrophy, or patients who have history of recurrent corneal erosion. In these patients, PRK is preferred over LASIK. So coming to some of the complications of PRK. So some of the post-operative complications of PRK, the first one, relatively rare, but which needs to be taken into cognition, are sterile infiltrates. So these are infiltrates because of the healing process which happens and the inflammatory release of cytokines because of the laser delivery. There can be some infiltration in the cornea which may be non-infective. And these sterile infiltrates are generally treated with the help of topical steroids. One of the most dreaded complication of PRK is post PRK haze, and that this is the reason which we use mitomycin, because mitomycin drastically reduces the incidence of post PRK haze after the surgery. And post PRK haze can come in the initial period, that can be in between 3 to 6 months, in which case it is called as early post PRK haze, and sometimes it presents in the late period after the surgery, that is around after 9 months of surgery, in which case it is called as late post PRK haze. If a patient develops post PRK haze, and then there are various methods to get the patient rid of the post PRK haze with the help of mechanical debridement or with the help of PTK or excimer laser again. The third, the least common but the most dreaded complication of PRK is infectious keratitis. So there are chances that during the healing period, because the stroma is exposed, the cornea may get infected and may develop a corneal ulcer. This is the complication which needs to be dealt with corneal scraping, and effective antibiotic or appropriate antibiotic treatment has to be started based on the etiological organism which you get on corneal scraping. So now coming to the next laser refractive surgery procedure, which is LASIK or laser assisted in situ keratomiliosis. So now basically in LASIK, what we do is that, so we make a flap over the cornea. This flap is like a cap, and then we lift up the flap to apply excimer laser over the cornea to change its shape depending on the amount of refractive error we want to correct, that is either myopia or hypermetropia. So now to make this flap over the cornea, there are two ways to go about it. Either we use a very sophisticated instrument called as a microkeratome, which has a sharp blade in it, which makes the flap over the cornea of an appropriate depth and size. Blade is a very crude term to use for this because it's very sophisticated and it's very accurate, and that's why it is called as a microkeratome. The other way, or the latest way to make a flap over the cornea, is by using the laser, a latest technology laser, which is called as femtosecond laser. So in that, basically what we do is that the computer scans the cornea, the depth of the cornea, the pachymetry of the cornea, and at an appropriate depth, the femtosecond laser makes a cleavage plane in the cornea, which can be dissected later on to make a flap out of it. This is called as femtosecond LASIK, and this is the latest technology for the making the flap for a LASIK procedure. So let me show you a short animation of what exactly we do in femtosecond LASIK. So as I've already told you, with the help of the latest laser, that is called as a femtosecond laser, a cleavage plane is made in the cornea at an appropriate depth, or the depth which we select. Generally, we keep a depth of between 100 to 120 microns for the flap, and then a side cut is made to demarcate the edge of the flap. Then the flap is lifted up and laser is applied, excimer laser, to correct the refractive error of the patient. Once that is done, the flap is put back into place and the eye drops are started for the patient. So the advantage of making a flap in LASIK is that the post-operative discomfort of the patient is minimum, number one. Number two, the predictability of the correction of the laser refractive surgery is also better as compared to PRK, because we depend less on the healing response of the body, and surgery is very quick. So in PRK, the visual recovery generally takes around 2 to 3 days for the 90 to 95% of the vision, and the remaining 5 to 10%, the clarity, the quality in vision, generally comes over a period of next 1 week. As compared to that, in PRK, it takes a little bit of time. The initial 90 to 95% of the visual recovery takes around 2 to 3 days till the epithelium grows back. The remaining 5 to 10%, the clarity, the quality of vision, takes around 3 to 4 weeks after that. That is around 1 week. But the patient generally can get back to their work in a week's time, because by that time, the initial fluctuation of the vision is very much under control and the epithelium is healed. And also the patient has good functional vision of around 90 to 95% at the end of the 1 week. So now coming to the next part. So this is a video of a laser refractive LASIK being done with the help of a microkeratome in a live patient. So what we do is that basically the microkeratome has a ring and a blade to it. So now once we place the ring on the cornea, so then the microkeratome, the instrument, is passed over the cornea to make a flap out of it. To keep the cornea into place, a suction is applied with the help of the ring on the cornea. Because all these procedures are done under topical anesthesia, injection is not given for any of these procedures. So that's why to stabilize the eye and to prevent movement of the ring over the eye, we apply some suction on the ring, just around the ring, to stabilize the eye. Once that is done, the microkeratome is used to make the flap. Just a second. Yeah. So now I'll show you the movement of the microkeratome over the cornea to make the flap. So I'm just checking the suction is adequate. There's no movement with the movement of the ring. So now this is a microkeratome which encompasses a very sharp blade in it, and this microkeratome moves over the cornea and is pulled back. So once that is done, a kind of a flap is made over the cornea. So now what we'll do is that we'll lift up the flap with the help of an instrument called as the flap lifter. It's a kind of a forceps. Once the flap is lifted, the rest of the procedure remains the same as I've already explained. We use an excimer laser in the central part of the cornea to correct the refractive error of the patient. Once that is done, the flap is put back. So the flap is put back over the cornea. A little bit of wash is given below the flap to remove any debris. Once the flap falls back into place, it's just washed with the help of Merosol sponge, just to make sure that it is very much into place and stuck to the underlying stroma. Generally, the flap gets stuck into place because of the function of the endothelial pump, and it is very well stuck into place over a couple of hours after the procedure. So the initial couple of hours is very important, and the patient has to be counseled that he shouldn't rub his eyes or touch his eyes rather, because any mechanical trauma to the flap may displace the flap. Now coming to this. So what we do in this that, so there is a docking mechanism in it. So there's a laser dock which has to be applied to the cornea before we can apply the femtosecond laser to the cornea. So this is the laser docking ring, which will be taking it near the surface of the cornea and applying it on the cornea so that we can apply the femtosecond laser on the cornea. So the laser dock is being taken near the cornea. So when it's applied to the cornea, a suction, again you can see the bubble. So this is a suction to prevent any undue movement of the eye when the laser delivery is being done. So very soon the laser delivery starts. The femtosecond laser delivery just takes, so this is a laser delivery which is being started. So first the flap plane is created, and at the end the side cut you will be seeing, this is a side cut which has been created. So this procedure just takes, the laser delivery just takes around 4 to 5 seconds. So it is very quick and absolutely painless to the patient also. So after that, the rest of the procedure remains the same. So what we do is that we dissect the flap which has been created with the help of the femtosecond laser. So this is the flap being dissected, because we have just created a plane. So we have not dissected the flap with the help of the laser. So now we dissect the flap with the help of instruments. So once the flap is dissected, we put back the flap, and rest of the procedure remains the same. We apply laser and then we put back the flap. So these are the two ways in which LASIK can be done, a microkeratome LASIK or a femtosecond LASIK. The femtosecond LASIK is also advertised these days as bladeless LASIK because it doesn't involve use of a microkeratome. Mind you, there's always a cut in the cornea in LASIK. The surgery itself is not free of any cut, but yeah, the procedure itself is free of blade. That's why it is also called as bladeless LASIK. So now highlighting few of the post-operative complications of LASIK. Complications after LASIK are relatively very rare, to the tune of less than 1%. So relatively LASIK is a very safe procedure. One of the complications can be that the epithelium, which is surrounding the flap, can grow below the flap because of the potent space or the potent plane which we have created to make the flap. And once the epithelium grows below, it is called as epithelial ingrowth. One of the other complications of LASIK flap are that the flap may get dislocated. The flap may get dislocated because of some trauma to the eye. And once the flap gets dislocated, this is a picture that the flap is being dislocated from one of the sides. It will be better seen in this retroillumination. As you can see, these are the folds in the flap because the same flap, this is a picture of the same flap. These are folds in the flap which can be seen on retroillumination. And this is the anterior segment OCT in which the folds of the flap are very clearly visible. This is called as flap dislocation. In this case, the flap needs to be put back into place with the by taking the patient for an operation again, for a surgery again. The second relatively less complication is central toxic keratopathy. In this, there is an inflammatory reaction in the central part of the cornea, which generally causes a little bit of melting of the flap below the surface, below the undersurface of the flap. And generally, it is self-limiting, and it causes a little bit of a hyperopic shift for a patient as the healing happens. And steroids are absolutely not to be used in central toxic keratopathy because although it is inflammatory, but it is self-limiting, and steroids have no role to play in the treatment of central toxic keratopathy. Other complication of LASIK is flap striae. So flap striae are basically folds in the flap which can be seen after the procedure. These can be of two types, microstriae or macrostriae. If the folds don't involve any folds in the stroma or the Bowman's membrane, then they are called as microstriae. And generally, nothing needs to be done for microstriae because they are optically insignificant and don't cause any visual problems to the patient. But if the flap striae are significant and when they are called as macrostriae and they involve the stroma or the Bowman's membrane, then they need to be treated with the help of various procedures by relifting the flap and stretching the flap or using a PTK laser to stretch the flap. One of the most dreaded complications of LASIK, and for which, as I've already told you, we use corneal topography to judge whether the patient has any risk of developing ectasia or no, is post-LASIK ectasia. So post-LASIK ectasia is a corneal ectasia which happens after a LASIK procedure. And once it starts, it's generally not self-limiting and collagen cross-linking may be needed. And the patient, it's difficult for the patient to gain an uncorrected visual acuity of 20/20. So to assess the risk of a patient developing post-LASIK ectasia, we do all the corneal topography measures, especially the latest measures which we do is seeing the posterior surface of the cornea also, whether there are any red flag signs in that, so that the patient doesn't have any risk for developing ectasia after the procedure. So that's why corneal topography is very important in the preoperative assessment of a patient. So coming to the last laser refractive surgery procedure, which is by the name SMILE. So in this procedure, basically what is done is that, so with the help of the femtosecond laser, the same laser which I told you is used to make a flap in the laser. So with the help of the same laser, what we do is that we make a very thin plate within the cornea. The thickness of the plate, the shape of the plate is determined by the amount of refractive error we need to correct in the patient. Once that plate is done with a very small 2 mm or 4 mm cut, we just remove the plate after dissecting it out from the cornea. So once that plate is removed, whatever refractive error the patient has gets corrected because of the flattening of the cornea subsequent to removal of the corneal tissue in the form of a plate. Let me show you a surgical video of the same. So this is a surgical video in which, so basically with the help of the initial femtosecond laser, we are making a plate within the cornea. So again, as I've already told you, to make a deliver the femtosecond laser, the eye movement has to be very stable. So this is the cup which we use, or the docking system which we use to stabilize the eye. And this is the femtosecond laser delivery being done in the cornea. This is the undersurface of the plate which is being made. Now from the center it will start, and the over surface of the plate will be made, which will extend a little bit beyond the undersurface so that the dissection is easy for the removal of the plate. And this is the cut which has been made to remove the plate. So now just a second, make the slide. Yeah. So now once the laser delivery is done, then we dissect the undersurface and the upper surface of the plate from within the cornea. The dissection is made with the help of an instrument called as the dissector. So once the dissection is done, then with a small cut which has already been made, we pull out the plate from within the cornea, as I've already told you. And then a little bit of interface wash is given. And this is how the procedure is completed. Again, the recovery in after SMILE laser refractive surgery procedure is also similar to LASIK. It's very quick. The comfort is also very good. The patient doesn't have much pain during the procedure, and even after the procedure, the patient has 90 to 95% vision in the first 2 to 3 days, and the remaining 5 to 10% vision comes in over a period of next 1 week, and the patient can get back to work over a period of 2 to 3 days after the procedure. So now one of the complications of SMILE is when the patient sometimes develops. So there's a potential space which has been made for the creation of the plate. So in that, if a patient develops any steroid response, can be in SMILE as well as LASIK below the flap, there can be some fluid accumulation which can happen in that space, which is called as pressure-induced stromal keratitis or PIS. If the patient develops that, then the steroids have to be absolutely stopped for the patients in the post-operative period, and anti-glaucoma medications needs to be started for these patients. And the detection of PIS is very important because the diagnosis is the key in managing these patients, and many a times this diagnosis is missed. Like the patient may develop some ingrowth through the flap cut in the LASIK, similarly can happen through the small 3 to 4 mm cut which we create in SMILE also, and epithelial ingrowth can be seen after SMILE, although very less common as compared to LASIK, but there are some anecdotal reports in which epithelial ingrowth has been seen after SMILE also. So for any patient, so all these complications which I have all right now shown you are very rare. I mean, in less than 1% of the patients. But two most common side effects which you need to inform each and every patient who is planning to undergo laser refractive surgery, be it any laser refractive surgery, PRK, LASIK or SMILE. The two most common ones. The first one is dry eye. So why dry eye happens? So basically in laser refractive surgery procedure, there is a little bit of damage to the subbasal as well as the subepithelial corneal nerve, and this decreases the corneal sensitivity overall. The reduced corneal sensitivity in turn reduces the blink rate of the patient and also reduces the tear secretion loop which is there. Because of this, the patient has a dry eye disease and an unstable tear film. Also, there is a little bit of damage to the goblet cells because of the suction which we apply in LASIK and SMILE, which I already told you. But the damage is very less, but yeah, it does cause a little bit of altered expression of the mucin, and which in turn causes dry eye disease. Also, most of the patients do have a little bit of dry eye disease after the procedure, but what we can do is that a meticulous ocular surface evaluation has to be done preoperatively in all patients, because any asymptomatic dry eye disease, if the patient already has dry eye disease before the procedure, will get very much aggravated after the procedure. So picking up any dry eye disease asymptomatic is very important in the preoperative workup of all laser refractive surgery procedure patients. Also, if at all the patient has a little bit of dry eye disease, maybe Meibomian gland dysfunction or maybe some tear film abnormality, we have to treat that first before taking up the patient for any laser refractive surgery procedure. In case you are doubtful that the dry eye disease may get too severe or you are not able to treat it very confidently, especially mild or moderate amounts of dry eye, in those cases, better to avoid any cut in the cornea, or better to avoid LASIK or SMILE and prefer surface ablation in the form of PRK in such patients. And in patients who have severe dry eye disease or any risk factors which may put a patient at risk in the future for severe dry eye disease, it's better to refrain refractive surgery for these patients. Some of the examples are patients who have diabetes mellitus type 1, patients who have rheumatoid arthritis, or the patients who have Sjogren's. These are the patients in which laser refractive surgery should be absolutely avoided because they have very high risk of developing dry eye disease, severe dry eye disease rather. The second most common side effect of any laser refractive surgery procedure are the optical phenomenon which the patient faces, that is in the form of glare colored halos and starburst. So all the patients need to be informed about this prior to the procedure. And although this phenomenon is very much temporary, most of the patients get rid of these phenomenon. Even if they develop, they get rid of these over a period of 1 week after the procedure. And most of them don't have it over after 3 months. But explaining to the patient that this is what they can expect in the initial post-operative period is very much helpful, so that the patients don't have any surprises. Especially these patients, all these are night vision problems. So driving or any night vision issues can arise in driving and have to be taken into account for all the patients and have to be informed to all the patients rather. So laser refractive surgery procedures, although I have shown you the two most common side effects also of these procedures, but as you can see, both these side effects are very much temporary and they are not long term. Also, the complications after laser refractive surgery, the risk of complications is very less, to the tune of it's less than 1% in the current era of laser refractive technology which we have. So if you consider the risk benefit ratio of a laser refractive surgery, the benefit ratio is very high and the risk is very less. So that's why laser refractive surgery is one of the most commonly performed cosmetic surgery in the world. LASIK has a 96% patient satisfaction rate. 96% of the patients who undergo any laser refractive surgery procedure are satisfied with the outcomes of the procedure. Also, up to 90%, rather more than 90% of the patients achieve unaided visual acuity of 20/20 or even better, and more than 99% of the patients achieve visual acuity of better than 20/40 in both of their eyes. So that way, the predictability of laser refractive surgery procedure with the current technology is very good. Also, as I've already told you, the serious complications of laser refractive surgery procedure happen in less than 1% of the patients. So that's why it's also considered as one of the safest cosmetic surgery procedure which is available in the world right now. So you all can happily give an option of laser refractive surgery procedure to your patients if at all they want to get it done. Thank you everyone for your patient listening.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Gogri, for that very informative talk, and with that live surgical video demonstrations and your animation. I think it makes it more interactive, and it's really important for us to understand as clinicians, right, to know how the procedure is done so that we can explain. And it's also, as you said, feel free to let your patients know that that option is available. Correct?
Yeah, you can just give them an option. So I mean, they can think about it, but yeah, you can just give them an option.
That's great. Okay. Going to the first question here. How are we going to select patients whether they are suitable for SMILE or LASIK? Is there any particular criteria you look at in selecting patients for which type of refractive procedure?
So basically, I have shown 5 basic criteria for any patient suitability for any laser refractive surgery procedure. So these 5 basic criteria remain the same for both SMILE as well as LASIK. The corneal thickness, the refractive error, the age, and everything else remains the same. The one criteria which differs is from the 5 basic criteria is that the predictability of SMILE, although we can correct astigmatism of up to 4 diopters, in the recent update we can correct up to 5 diopters also, but the predictability of SMILE for correcting astigmatism of more than 1 diopter is not as good as LASIK. So if a patient has compound myopic astigmatism and his cylindrical power, if it's more than 1 diopter, then we can, and if you have access to both the procedures, LASIK or SMILE, then we prefer LASIK a little bit more as compared to SMILE. So this is the difference between these two procedures based on the basic criteria. So now comes the second part. So now depending on the patient profile, so the patients who are more into using computers, or the patients from IT sector who are using computers up to 10 to 12 hours on a daily basis, that is what their life demands and their job demands. Because SMILE has been shown to have less dryness as compared to LASIK, and this has been shown beyond doubt, especially in the initial post-operative period after the laser procedure. So in patients who are already going to work long hours in front of the system, in those patients, we can prefer SMILE a little bit more over LASIK, because their post-operative comfort in terms of dry eye disease will be better because they have to sit long hours in front of the screen. This is the number 2 criteria. Number 3 criteria of preferring SMILE over LASIK is patients who are involved in active sports like be it contact sports or athletes. These are because these are the patients who are predisposed to some trauma to the eye and can have flap related complications in LASIK. So in these patients, we can prefer SMILE over LASIK if at all they are suitable for SMILE. So these are the three main criteria in which you can differentiate one procedure over the other.
Okay, great.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, definitely. I think very elaborative, and most of the thing you did cover in your talk as well. But thank you for summarizing everything in a gist. All right, let's look at another question. In your experience, any chances of refractive error coming back after laser surgery in the future? So, does that happen?
So yeah, so again, this the answer to this question also has two aspects to it. Number one, so now with the current technology of the laser excimer laser which we use, the chances of refractive error coming back have reduced as compared to what it was in the initial days. In the initial days, we used to use a broad beam laser. Now we use a excimer laser which is called as a flying spot laser. So just to simplify it, what in flying spot laser, what happens is that the multiple spots are given at different areas on the cornea, and at the same point, every fifth laser spot is delivered. So it is not delivered continuously. After a point, it is delivered at the same point on the cornea. So this is called as a flying spot excimer laser. So because of the advent of flying spot excimer laser, the chances of refractive error coming back, the medical terminology for this refractive error coming back after laser refractive procedure is called as regression. That is the first part. Number two, so now when we correct high refractive error, preferably refractive error more than 6, more so more than 8, then definitely there are chances that in the future some refractive error may come back. And this regression happens because the epithelium remodels over a period of time. So now because you have flattened the cornea, so if you're correcting a myopia, basically you're flattening the cornea. So now the epithelium over the cornea remodels to come back to give a circular shape. So because of this remodeling of the epithelium over a period of time in the future, there can be some regression which may come back. This is more common because of more flattening which we do in refractive error, correcting more than 8 diopters, sometimes more than 6 diopters. The chances of regression in refractive error less than 6 diopters correction is not mathematically 0, but practically nil. You can tell the patients that.
Okay, great. That's again important. So again, it all boils down to patient selection, as you were saying. Select your patients properly. Initial topography and all that plays a very important role, right?
Yes, and the amount of refractive error. If the patient has refractive error more than 6 or preferably more than 8, then you can explain to them, there are chances. And even if the refractive error comes back, it never comes back to the complete extent. Most commonly, it comes to the tune of around 1 to 1.5, maximum 2 diopters, but it doesn't come back to the complete extent, never.
Okay. And anything you would like to add on more? I know you have covered this, but anything you would like to add on if there are any advantages of SMILE over femtosecond LASIK?
So a couple of advantages which I've already talked about is the post-operative dry eye disease, which is less in SMILE, less severe in SMILE and short-lived in SMILE as compared to a femtosecond LASIK. That is one which I've covered. Also, optically, it has been seen that patients who have undergone SMILE have a little bit of better. Now, this is just proven optically. This has not been studied in patients, but yeah, have a little bit of better depth perception as compared to patients who have undergone LASIK. This is one, if at all I have to put it theoretically, this is one of the advantages of SMILE over LASIK. But yeah, this has not been proven in patients, but yeah, optically it has been proven.
Okay, great. With your experience and optically, yeah. And can we correct presbyopes with LASIK?
Yeah, there are a couple of options for correcting presbyopic patients with laser refractive surgery procedure. One option is doing monovision. So what we do is that if at all a patient comes for a laser refractive surgery procedure around the age of 45 years or so, then we may give a trial of contact lens to the patient in which we may do a monovision or a micro monovision in the non-dominant eye and give full correction in the dominant eye. And then we tell the patient to use the contact lens for 1 week. And if the patient is comfortable with that kind of a mono or micro monovision in his day-to-day activities, then we can do the same with the help of laser refractive surgery procedure. The number 2 is that Presby LASIK, it is called. So basically, the correction of the refractive error in different zones varies with the if you go from the center to the periphery of the cornea. And this also helps in patient in giving a little bit of near vision. But yeah, the results of Presby LASIK are not very, I mean, 100% proven. But yeah, the satisfaction is to the tune of around 50 to 60% if I have to put it in numbers.
Great. So there is an option available, but we can say that it's still under trials and probably again.
Not under trial. I mean, there are a lot of centers who do Presby LASIK, but yeah, the patient satisfaction, because see, presbyopia is something which is dynamic. It increases with the age of the patient. And also the lifestyle of the patient is very, I mean, many patients may just have need for intermediate vision. They are not much concerned about reading and all. Some patients are more into near vision and they are not much concerned about intermediate. So even the demand of the patient varies with the lifestyle of the patient. And so the satisfaction rate with Presby LASIK is to the tune of around 50 to 60% with the patient.
That's right. Okay, great. And anything you would like to add on the relationship of the corneal thickness which is being ablated or burnt with the amount of refractive error getting corrected? So anything?
Okay, yeah. So there's definitely a relation. So and it varies with the machine which you're using. But I can tell you the relation for the machine which we are using is the EX500 by Alcon over here. This is the excimer machine which we are using. And in this machine, for every diopter you correct of refractive error, we burn the thickness of the cornea to the tune of between 12 to 15 microns for one diopter of correction. That is how it works in an excimer machine EX500 of Alcon. And compared to that, what we do in SMILE. So in SMILE, basically, we are not burning anything in SMILE. As I've already told you, we make a plate within the cornea. So that thickness of the plate for every diopter, for the first diopter, it is little bit more, because otherwise handling that plate or dissecting and removing it out from the cornea gets a bit difficult. But otherwise, generally for each diopter, the thickness which we are removing from the cornea is to the tune of around 17 to 18 microns. It's a little bit more in SMILE as compared to excimer laser in LASIK or PRK.
Okay, great. All right. So that's again really important information, because corneal thickness we need to estimate based on the amount of corneal thickness what the patient has, and then that helps us to estimate how much we are going to ablate or how much we are going to remove, whether there is the amount still there.
Yeah, for the residual stromal bed, you're absolutely right, because that also plays one of the important roles, because we need initially the idea was we need to keep a residual stromal bed of at least 250 microns, but now this idea has changed and it has come to the tune of around 300 to 320 microns. There's not an exact value, but yeah, some surgeons prefer 320 microns, some surgeons prefer 300 microns for the residual thickness beds these days.
That's right, yeah. And I think this is again 1% of LASIK patients had some optic nerve problem. Probably was it there on your slides, maybe? Or
yeah. So basically, this is rarest of the rare. So these optic nerve problems is basically related to glaucoma. Some patients, especially, develop steroid-induced glaucoma after the procedure, and some patients were inherently at risk of developing glaucoma. And in those patients, LASIK was done and they developed glaucoma, and that is the optic nerve problems which they are talking about. The second thing is that patients who already have glaucoma and they have, disc damage has been documented. In this, if at all you plan laser refractive surgery procedure, so there are two problems with it. Number one problem is that, as I've already told you, we apply suction on the eye for both LASIK as well as SMILE. We don't do that in PRK, but in LASIK and SMILE, we apply suction on the cornea, on the eye, in general, on the sclera. So now that causes a rise in the intraocular pressure. So this rise in the intraocular pressure varies with the machine. With the femtosecond LASIK, the docking mechanism may cause around 60 to 70 millimeter mercury in the intraocular pressure rise. In SMILE, it's relatively less, to the tune of 35 to 40 microns. This itself, 35 to 40 millimeters of mercury. This itself can cause a little bit of damage, especially in patients who already have glaucoma or on treatment for glaucoma. The other aspect too is that the measurement of IOP gets a little bit difficult after a laser refractive surgery procedure because of two reasons. Number one, you have reduced the thickness of the cornea, so you get a false low IOP. Number two, you have changed the shape of the cornea to flattening it. This also causes false low IOP. So even if the patient may have 20 millimeter mercury of IOP after undergoing LASIK, the same patient, if at all you do the gold standard, which is there, the GAT or the Goldman applanation tonometry, you'll get a false low IOP basically. You'll get to the tune of 14 to 15. So you have to take into account this also in patients who have glaucoma, if at all you are planning laser refractive surgery.
Okay. Again, everything boils down to patient selection. I think we have to
Yes,
go with
it's very important. Yeah.
right? Okay, couple of more questions.
Hmm.
Is there any changes which happens to the back surface of the cornea post LASIK or the back?
Absolute, absolutely no. There's no change which happens on the back surface of the cornea. The relation of the front surface, the shape of the front surface of the cornea to the back surface of the cornea definitely changes because you're flattening the front surface and there's no change which is happening in the back surface. But there's absolutely no change which happens in the back surface of the cornea. We do see the back surface of the cornea because that is any elevation in the back surface or protrusion in the back surface of the cornea is one of the risk factors which has been proven beyond doubt that the patient may develop post LASIK ectasia if at all you do LASIK or smile in those cases. So that's why we do see the back surface of the cornea for any abnormal elevation, but nothing changes after LASIK or any laser refractive surgery as after the surgery.
Okay, great. So it's mostly on the anterior surface.
Yeah.
If the patient's refractive error is suitable for both LASIK and ICL, how would you go about recommending the patient? Which one is the one you would suggest probably?
So if at all the patient is suitable for LASIK in all aspects for the same refractive error, then it's LASIK all the way for any patient because LASIK is something which we do outside the eye and ICL is something which we do inside the eye. So the risk or the complications associated with ICL, rather than they being rarest of the rare, but they are all visually deteriorating complications and difficult to manage. The two common ones which I can tell you, they are not common, but the two ones which I can tell you are cataract and glaucoma. I mean the raise in intraocular hypertension which can happen after ICL. So when it's possible to do something outside the eye, it's always better to do something outside the eye rather than going inside the eye. It's as simple as that.
Great. Okay. Very good analogy, right? I mean, really important. Yeah. And this is again question popped up twice, very commonly asked. If the patient has underwent LASIK and develops a cataract, and we want to calculate the intraocular pressure, intraocular lens power. Sorry, anything to be taken into consideration for that?
Yeah, this is an excellent question actually in today's perspective because very soon, at the rate at which we are doing laser refractive surgery procedures, very soon we are going to have a lot of patients will be coming to us in their old age for getting cataract surgery who have undergone laser refractive surgery procedure. Just to put things in perspective, on an average, there's some 7 lakh surgeries are done every year in US itself, just in one country of laser refractive surgery procedures. So just imagine, even the numbers are quite staggering in the Asian countries also. So yeah, so coming back to the question, with the advent of the latest technology, so by technology, what I mean is the Scheimpflug based imaging. So what Scheimpflug based imaging has helped us do is that it has helped us to map the posterior surface of the cornea also, the shape of the posterior surface of the cornea. So now we can exactly get the actual true net power of the cornea, which is called as a true corneal power in some machines. It is called as true net power in some machines because of the shape in the anterior as well as the posterior surface remains the same because of the change in the anterior surface of the cornea in LASIK. So now with the fourth generation of IOL formulas, that is the Barrett's formulas, the fourth generation Higgins formula, IOL calculating formulas, if at all we use both the total corneal power, then the predictability of IOL power calculation is much better than what it used to be. Yeah, as correct, you are initially when we couldn't map the posterior surface of the cornea, the IOL power calculation was difficult in patients who have undergone LASIK. But yeah, with the today's technologies, the predictability or the accuracy has reached to the tune of 90 to 95%. In a normal patient who has not undergone LASIK, the predictability or the accuracy with the latest machines is more than 95% for IOL power formula calculation of an IOL power. But even for LASIK patients, initially it was less. I agree, it was to the tune of 80 to 85%, but now it has reached to the tune of 90 to 95%. And now because we are gathering data and artificial intelligence is working on the data. So once we have more data, the day is not very far off that will reach the accuracy more than 95% also.
Yeah, probably we'll have a new IOL calculation formula, IOL.
Yeah, so artificial intelligence is working right now and it is collecting the data, and based on that, it is actually predicting how much is the accuracy and how we can improve that accuracy. And very soon we'll have it actually. That's correct.
That's right. Okay, great. And how would you go about treating post-LASIK ectasia, ectatic corneas? Any suggestions on what tips you would give?
So I would always tell that prevention is better than cure in this complication of LASIK. That's why we do all this corneal topography, any abnormal corneal topography, any back surface, any elevation, any red flag signs, low corneal thickness, better to avoid LASIK or SMILE in those patients, or PRK for that matter in those patients. But yeah, if at all, unfortunately, the patient does turn up with post-LASIK ectasia. So what has been shown is that the efficacy of collagen cross-linking in stopping the progression of post-LASIK ectasia is not as good as in keratoconus. So the efficacy, though, so that's why, though we have collagen cross-linking, but the efficacy is not as good. Still, collagen cross-linking is the only armamentarium we have to stop the progression, if at all there is progression in patients of post-LASIK ectasia. That comes the progression part. The other aspect is the visual aspect. So for the visual aspect, it is same as keratoconus. If the patient's best corrected visual acuity is better than 20/40 with spectacles, give them spectacles. If it's not better than 20/40, then contact lenses are the way to go even for these kind of patients for post-LASIK ectasia. In a very few, rarest of the rare, I have seen patients who develop very advanced post-LASIK ectasia. In those patients, apart from Boston side scleral lens or the Prose lens or any scleral lens for that matter, there is an option of corneal transplant, but I have never heard corneal transplant being done, at least in the last 3 to 4 years, at our institute also for any post-LASIK ectasia, because right now we have scleral contact lenses which give very good vision to these patients.
Okay, so again, very, very well said. Prevention is better than cure.
Sure,
Yeah.
in this case, absolutely.
Everything I think comes down to patient selection. If you select patients well, I think you will minimize the risk of all of these problems, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And we did mention about the halo and everything. Could you explain more on the contrast activity in these three types of refractive procedure? Does the color and contrast activity change, or have you found out any?
So yeah, color saturation initially in PRK is a little bit less because of the healing response. In the initial 2 to 3 days, it's less in SMILE as well as LASIK also because of the corneal edema basically. But yeah, it gets back to normal. So in the long term, there's absolutely no change in the color vision of the patient. But yeah, contrast sensitivity of the patient does reduce with any laser refractive surgery procedure, be it PRK, LASIK or SMILE. And that reduction in the contrast acuity or the contrast acuity, both temporal as well as spatial contrast acuity, is less hampered in SMILE. Again, this is theoretically proven, not in patients. In a few studies, it has been proven in patients also, but yeah, the sample size has not been very huge. And it is a little bit more in cases of PRK.
Okay.
But otherwise, practically speaking, if you ask me practically, there's not much change in the contrast acuity of the patients. I mean, not the patient doesn't come that, yeah, I have been facing these issues.
All right.
And the last terminology which he has used is in the question, FLAPS is actually not femtosecond LASIK, it is a femtosecond laser assisted cataract surgery.
Cataract surgery. Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, great. And one last question, which I think is most probably required to be attended, the role of optometrist. So what do you think can be a role of optometrist in refractive surgical procedures? How can we go about, getting involved in these procedures?
So yeah, optometrists actually have a very important role to play, especially even in our setup, the setup which we follow at LV Prasad Eye Institute. Over here also, optometrists play a very important role. So number one is that determining whether what is the exact refractive error of the patient, because because based on that we decide whether it is stable or it is not stable. Apart from that, what the optometrists can do is that in their own practice or in their independent practice, they can at least give an option to the patient, especially, and they can clear most of the doubts of the patients, because there is especially in India, there are a lot of misnomers or a lot of misconceptions, rather not misnomers, misconceptions regarding laser refractive surgery procedures. So that can be cleared by an optometrist, and that an option can be given to the patient. Even if you have not done a corneal topography, based on the lifestyle of the patient, as I've already mentioned, based on the lifestyle of the patient, the demand of the patient, the age of the patient, the refractive error of the patient, if the patient falls into that up to 8 diopters category, or if the patient is a very high myopia, then you can tell no, laser refractive surgery, there are not, and we cannot do for this power, and you can go for a phakic IOL or an implantable Collamer lens inside, ICL inside the eye. And so the optometrist has a very important role even in that. Apart from that, in our clinic also, based on the corneal topography, because even the corneal topography is handled by optometrists at LV Prasad Eye Institute. And based on that only, they put in there, this patient is suitable for this, and they do a little bit of counseling for the patient. I mean, give a heads up to the patient. This is what you can expect. Although the final discussion you can have based on your demands, what you demand from the surgery and what are your expectations after the surgery, that you can discuss with the doctor. But yeah, even the corneal topography part is taken care by the optometrists at our institute. So they play a very important role in our laser refractive surgery clinic over here at LV Prasad Eye Institute. And in general, they have a very important role to play, apart from giving the option to the patient, the counseling, and apart from that, the suitability of the patient also.
That's right. Okay, wonderful. I just missed out one question. I'm just going to take that. This is regarding when we were talking about the rebound effect of refractive error, right? So
yeah, regression.
The regression, yeah. So it only happens in very small percentage of population or small percentage of patients who underwent the refractive procedures. But then if that happens, how do you normally go about, treating that? Would you advise contact lenses? Is ortho-K okay to be put on these LASIK eyes, or just spectacles would work? I mean, what's your take?
So generally, because these, as I've already told you, these regression generally happens in patients in which we have corrected high refractive error. So correcting high refractive error means, refractive error more than 6, preferably more than 8. Correcting high means so much amount of flattening of the cornea. And because so much amount of flattening has already happened, ortho-K lenses generally don't work well in these cases. We have actually tried in a couple of cases just to find out how it's working, but the effect was not that good because already so much of flattening has happened in the cornea. Contact lenses is a very good option, which I give to most of my patients because I don't do repeat surgery, because already the thickness of the cornea or the residual stromal bed, which we were already talking about, is already, because we have corrected high refractive error, most of the patients is already reached to that residual stromal bed. So we don't repeat the correction for the 1.5, 2. If the patient comes after the age of 40 years, then we tell them, yeah, this is actually good for you. Very soon you will not be requiring any reading glasses, and for the distance we'll give you contact lens or we'll give you glasses. But ortho-K lenses don't really work, and contact lens is my go-to for such kind of patients if at all they come in the future.
All right. Okay, great. So thank you so much, Dr. Gogri, for this very informative talk. And I think the chat box, I saw a couple of messages thanking you as well for the very informative session and, giving us all the relevant answers, because these are some questions which I think only experienced people can tell us, because we don't have as many ideas.
No, it's absolutely been my pleasure. Rather, I try to make it as simple as possible and as practical as possible, rather than going into the details. And it's always been my pleasure to have such lectures, especially for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So
thank you for coming.
Most welcome. We do have session planned next week, so please join us next week on Saturday. So thank you everyone for joining today's session. I hope to see you next week. Thank you, Dr. Pratik, for once again from the attendees as well as from the team Online Optom Learning Series for giving us your time. Take care, everyone. Be safe and see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.